we're talking to Miss Carrie M. Gentry, and we're doing a profile dealing with some of the things that have been important in her career. And of course, Mr. Gentry, before we had our first commercial break, you were talking about some of the activities that you and your husband were involved in at the time. So let's let you pick up that in whatever way you wish to do.
Well, I'll back up a little bit and speak of my going to Howard University at that particular time, which was sort of unbelievable that I would have the opportunity to go to college anywhere, because none of my other family members had had that opportunity, with my mother having died and the family having scattered over these United States. But a sister of mine who had lived with another sister in New York married, and she and her husband moved to Washington, D.C. And they said, why don't you come on down here and live with us and go to Howard? So I said, well, my goodness, that would be a great opportunity for me, and that's what I did. I went and I lived with them that first year. I might say that back in those years, of course, we didn't fly as much as we fly nowadays, but I remember coming into the train station and getting a bus, I think, to go to where they lived, down there on U Street and Georgia Avenue, I think it was, down in that section of Washington. Having lived in Boston all of those teenage years, I had never in life seen that many black people in one place in all of my life before. It was a summer afternoon, very warm, and they were congregated down there on the corner of Georgia Avenue and U Street. And I said, my goodness, this is a different kind of situation than I had seen up there in Boston. Certainly there were a lot of black people in Boston, but this was a nice Sunday afternoon in Washington, D.C. So the next morning I walked up to Howard. We didn't ride that much back in those days. I walked up to Howard University and on to the campus, and my goodness, to walk up there on that campus and to not know where in the world I was going. I knew that I needed to go to the chapel, because that's where all the students were going to meet, the new students. So I saw one young lady walking down toward me, so I said, where's the chapel? And she said, right there. So that shows how intelligent I was and not what I knew about where I was. So that was the chapel right there. So we went into that chapel, and until this day, that girl and I are good friends. And she's still living. You know, I speak like that because so many of our peers are no longer living. So anyway, I had some wonderful experiences at Howard University. That girl's family, she was from Washington. That girl's family took me in like a member of the family. And until this day, as I said before, we are very, very close. So my experiences there at Howard were just wonderful. I majored in health and physical education, and majored in rhythmics in particular. So when I came here to Tennessee State University, my interest certainly was in the rhythmical activities. So there at Tennessee State University, I taught health and physical education, and later on in the years, I got the opportunity to work in the area that I chose, which was the dance. And I was the director of the majorettes for, I think, about 15 years there, when Frank Greer was the band director. So Tennessee State University.
Say something about that band and some of your experiences there, Mr. Gentry. We've talked to Professor Edward Graves and Dungy and a number of others, and they've talked about that band and about Mr. Greer. What were some of your impressions after working some 15 years with the band and Mr. Greer?
Oh, Mr. Greer, he was a terrific motivator. He could have those students to feel like they were the best things in the world. I remember the way that name, the Aristocrat of Bands, came about, and incidentally, that band was invited to play at some of the National Football League games, which were some of the firsts that black schools had been offered the opportunity to play at those half times of the National Football League. I think we were up in Cleveland one of those times. And we had performed, and the newspapers wrote up the fact that we were there, and they mentioned this was the aristocrat of bands. But what I want to say about Mr. Greer and that band, we worked just wonderfully well together. But there was a time when I had chosen a certain piece of music and had worked out the routine for the majorettes to do. And the next thing I knew, the band was out there playing that music and going through their movements with that, with the band.
With your music.
The music. So I talked with Mr. Greer about it. I won't say we fussed. We had a great relationship. But I did sort of talk with him about that. And Mr. Greer, I told you about his being the motivator that he was. Mr. Greer said to me, he said, Mrs. Gentry, this is certainly what you do is important, but this is the big picture. and I can hear him now when we would go to different cities for the band to perform. I can hear him talking to the band members and saying to them, now when you march out onto that field, you remember, this is the big picture. You are representing Tennessee State University. And he was just a real good person. And we had some great times back there then. So anyway, we had some good times. I'm trying to remember the first year that I worked with the band. It was the first year that my husband became head football coach at Tennessee State University. And you remember I said to you that he didn't want to come down here because he thought that Dr. Davis was not
unusual.
Well, because he talked about developing these kinds of players, the All-America and so forth, and playing before crowds of 40,000 and 50,000. Well, what happened? The first year that I worked with the band and my husband became head football coach, our team, football team, did not lose a game. They won all 10 games. So they were selected to play in the Orange Blossom Classic.
Well, let's hold it right there, Ms. Gentry, so we can take our second commercial break, and then we'll come back and talk about the Orange Blossom Classic and other things. And we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Talking to Ms. Carrie M. Gentry.